Historical references and literature rarely agree on the true origin of the gladiator and the gladiatorial games. In the late 1st century BC, Nicholas of Damascus believed that gladiators were Etruscan. A generation later, Livy wrote that the first gladiatorial games were held in 310 BC by the Campanians tribe in celebration of their victory over the Samnite Confederation. Long after the games had ceased, the 7th century AD writer Isidore of Seville derived Latin lanista, which means manager of the gladiators, from the Etruscan word for executioner, and the title of Charun from an underworld guide for the souls who accompanied the dead from the Roman gladiatorial arena. Roman historians emphasize the gladiatorial games as a foreign import, most likely Etruscan. This explanation has been accepted as the standard history of the Roman games in the early modern era. Livy dates the earliest Roman gladiatorial games to 264 BC, in the early stages of Rome's First Punic War against Carthage, when the sons of Junius Brutus Hera had 3 pairs of gladiators fight to the death in Rome's cattle market forum to honor their dead father. This type of celebration is described as munera. Munera means a commemorative duty owed to the subterranean deities of dead ancestors by their descendants. Further research of the evidence supports a Campanian origin, or at least a borrowing for the games and gladiators. The earliest known example of Roman gladiator schools, known as ludi, were in Campanian tomb frescoes from Paestum in 4th century BC, which show paired fighters with helmets, spears, and shields in a funeral blood rite that predates early Roman gladiatorial games. Compared to these images, supporting evidence from Etruscan tomb paintings is uncertain and late. Depictions of gladiators could be found all over Rome and its empire, and amongst all classes. Walls in the 2nd century BCE Italian agora at Delos were decorated with paintings of gladiators. Mosaics dating from the 2nd through 4th centuries CE have proved invaluable to the reconstruction of gladiatorial combat and of its rules, the gladiator types, and the development of the munus. Throughout the Roman Empire, lamps, gems, jewelry, and ceramics, as well as mosaics, statues, reliefs, and wall paintings provide evidence of the clothing, equipment, props, events, names, prevalence, and the rules of gladiatorial combat. Earlier periods provide only occasional examples of gladiator influence. Over time, gladiatorial games became separated from the funeral celebration context and were held by the rich as a means of displaying their power and influence within their community. Advertisements for gladiatorial displays have survived at Pompeii, painted by professional signwriters on house fronts or on the walls of tombs clustered outside the city gates. The number of gladiators to be displayed was a big attraction. The more gladiators, the more generous the sponsor was thought to be, and the more exciting the combat. Most gladiators were slaves. These slaves were subjected to rigorous training regimens, fed a high-calorie diet, and given the best available medical treatment for their day. These training and medical requirements made owning gladiators an expensive endeavor. For a gladiator who died in combat, the trainer, also known as a lanista, would sometimes charge the sponsor of the game up to 100 times the cost of a gladiator who survived. Because of this, it was very costly for the sponsors to give the audiences the bloodshed that they often demanded. Although allowing a gladiator to be slain was seen as an indication of their generosity and of their wealth. Generally, gladiators were condemned criminals, prisoners of war, or slaves. Remarkably, volunteering to become a gladiator was not uncommon. The main incentive was the down payment that a volunteer received upon taking the gladiatorial oath. This oath meant that the owner of the ludus had ultimate sanction over the gladiator's life, basically making him a slave. Some unorthodox emperors with a perverted sense of humor commanded upper-class Roman citizens, both male and female, to perform combat in the arena. For the upper class performing in gladiatorial combat, it could cost them to forfeit many rights as Roman citizens. But as long as they did not receive compensation for their participation, they would be exempt from the consequences of infamia. Infamia was a legal disability that was attached to the practitioners of disreputable professions, such as those of gladiators, actors, and prostitutes. In 326 AD, the gladiatorial tradition was suppressed by Constantine, the first Christian emperor. With the influence of Christianity now entering the Roman society, the days of gladiatorial games were coming to an end. The last official gladiatorial games took place during the reign of Emperor Honorius. The games were completely outlawed by Emperor Honorius in 404 AD. The catalyst for this change was an Egyptian monk named Telemachius, who had newly arrived in Rome and witnessed a gladiatorial game in 404 AD. He objected to the violence, bloodshed, and slaughter in the arena. During a game, he even shouted for the combat to cease in the name of Christ. He was stoned by the outraged mob and killed. 3 days later, the Emperor Honorius decreed that the gladiatorial games were to stop. Instead, less violent events, such as hunting events, continued to be shown until 523 AD. The influx of Christianity led to a great change of attitudes in the Roman Empire. The Roman culture went from being agnostic to becoming pacifist. With the new Christian religion, the Roman people's morals, principles, and values changed, and the violence of the arena was no longer acceptable.